Welcome, everyone interested in this ancient text called the Bible, written thousands of years ago, and yet it's supposed to mean something to us today. I'm your host, Jonathan the Dumb Christian, and when I was a kid, I wanted nothing more than to become the Green Power Ranger. On that note, if you are looking for a toy to give as a gift, especially as a child in a birthday situation, the Pink Power Ranger is always a guaranteed win. Today we are going to look at a chunk of chapters in Genesis all together. There's a lot of details. We're going to go chapters 7 through 10. So be sure to read it for yourself. God said it the way he wants to say it. He'll always say it better than I can say it. I'm just a dumb Christian trying to wrap my head around why Moses wrote about the flood the way that he did to a nation of people who were just liberated from Egypt, because there's a lot going on in these few chapters. So buckle up. We're about to get colorful and excited. The Bible's about to get real. Welcome to Dumb Christian. Last week we talked with Hunter in a double chair about why God sent the flood. But before the flood comes, let's review a few things. Noah was given the name Noah, which means respite, because people were sick and tired of having to work their asses off for a few measly ears of sweet corn every year. They wanted finally some reprieves. Names mean things in the Bible. So when Noah was named respite, it kind of carried with it this weighty spiritual significance. And whether God blessed that name or however it happened, the tradition says that Noah was blessed with the wisdom of tools, and he invented the plow, which made farming immeasurably easier. But it also blessed him with the ability to create the equipment and the tools that he would need to build a big-ass boat called the Ark. That'd be big enough to house all the animals and people that need to get on the boat to stay alive during the flood that's about to come. So when we ask the question, well, how was Noah able to build the Ark? Jewish tradition says he was given special divine wisdom for tools and equipment. And then we ask the question, well, how did all the animals get there? Again, we look to the Midrash, Jewish tradition, that tells us God brought all the pairs of the animals that were meant to be on the ark. He brought them to Noah, and as the rains started to come down, Noah spoke, "Lions and gazelles, please, everyone to your seats. Our journey is about to begin shortly." Then God lifts up the door, closes it on Noah and the animals, and then it rains for 40 days and 40 nights. Early in creation, we hear something about a firmament around the earth. And it's this idea that there's a layer of water that surrounds the whole earth, very similarly to how our ozone surrounds the whole earth. You know, except in those heavily polluted areas where I think, it's fading. Anyway, the firmament, it's this sphere of water, this layer of water that protects the earth. And the sages say that the firmament actually caused the atmospheric integrity and the environment of the earth to be significantly different than what we see today. That means oxygen levels and carbon levels and the how quickly things grew and died and all this stuff is very different, so different that we can't even comprehend what the world was like before the flood, at least on a grand scale. The firmament actually collapses. This is what causes rain for 40 days and for 40 nights. And then also it says that the waters came rushing up from the surface of the earth, the freshwater springs, and all the water underneath the surface explodes onto the surface. And so it's coming from below and it's coming from above, and it rains for 40 days and for 40 nights. Numbers are extremely important in the Jewish tradition. Whenever you see the number 40 or a multiple of 40, according to Jewish numerology, 40 is an indication of a divine, supernatural, incredibly significant change that is about to occur. We see 40 a few times right here, 40 days, 40 nights. We see that that the Israelites were in slavery to Egypt for 400 years, 40 times 10. We see that before Moses was about to liberate Israel, he spends 40 years in the desert. Then after Israel is liberated, they spend 40 years in the desert. We see that there's 400 years of silence between the end of the Old Testament and the beginning of the New Testament. We see that Jesus spends 40 days in the desert before he begins his ministry. 40 indicates that some supernatural, significant divine change is about to occur, and namely, specifically 4 or 2, those experiencing the 40 or the multiple of 40. And in this passage, in this section here, it says, it rained for 40 days and 40 nights, while Noah, his family, and the animals were on the ark. The 40 here occurring is affecting all of creation. It's 40 days of rain for Noah, his family, 40 days of rain for all the animals on the ark, 40 days of rain for the earth itself, and then it even says 40 days and nights, implying that even time itself and the way that we gauge a day is changed. The way that we understand and interact with all of creation is about to undergo a significant supernatural change, and it is going to change literally everything. We can do some math. Jewish tradition also says that Noah spent 1 year on the boat. It rains for 40 days, 40 nights. The whole earth is flooded. Even the tallest mountain peak is like 30 feet underwater. And Noah spends a year. Noah, his family, all the animals spend a year on the boat, being rocked back and forth by the waves. No seagulls, just waves. The rain stops after 40 days, 40 nights, and they're still carried about in the waves, the ebb and flow, the back and forth. Anybody seasick yet? And then at some point, the waters start to recede. They start to evaporate because the environment changes now, and evaporation and clouds form. Weather happens, has never happened before, as far as we know. And it changed, and the water is receding. And the boat hits something, and then it stops bouncing back and forth on the waves, and it starts to stand still. Noah starts to begin to wonder, have we landed? Is it done? You can't open the big door just yet, because if the water's still out there, it'll come flooding right in. So he's got these little windows up at the top that he can kind of peek out, and it still looks like there's water out there. He can't quite tell, but the boat has stopped rocking. So he takes a raven out of the bird cage and he sends it out the window to see what maybe the bird can bring back some sort of indication of whether or not our whole earth is still flooded. Raven flies back and forth. He can see it. Finally, the raven comes back. He does this for days and days. And then one day, the raven doesn't come back. But that doesn't mean anything. Maybe the raven got lost. Maybe the raven, dove into the water and then couldn't get out and drowned. Who knows? So we're still not quite ready to open the big door. So what Noah then does is he takes one of the doves, a pigeon, out of its bird cage, sends it out the window, and does this for like every day for a week. And then at the end of the week, the dove comes back with a leaf in its mouth, indicating that the water has receded enough, the earth has dried up enough that plant life is coming back, and it's above the surface of the water, enough so that a bird could pluck a leaf to start making a nest with. Then Noah sends out the dove, and the dove doesn't come back. So this time, Noah thinks, okay, now we have proof that the waters are low enough that we can go out. So he opens up the big door. It drops down on the ground, and a big, huge blast of sunlight comes flooding into the ark. Have you ever seen when cows are released from their winter homes into a spring pasture where the grass is just starting to get green and the sun is just starting to get warm? These full-grown cows are like doing somersaults and flips, and they're kicking their legs and they're jumping all over the place because they're so excited to be outside in the sun, experiencing the fresh weather. I imagine this is what all the animals are clamoring. They're so excited. They just are jumping and shouting and you know, woohoo! And they flood out of the ark and just enjoy the sun. They bask in the sun. My dog likes to just go outside and lay in the sun. And I imagine so many of them just came out of this boat, this stinky, claustrophobic boat, and they're finally released into the open, wild air. And they're running, they're frolicking, and some of them are just laying, soaking up the sun. And they're finally free from the ark. And then Noah does something. There's this real brief verse that says, and he offered a burnt sacrifice. So when you're reading the types of animals that come in, you're going to notice that there were more clean animals that God brought onto the ark than unclean animals. And this is primarily because clean animals are used for sacrifice. And it says that Noah made a burnt offering sacrifice to God. There's a lot that going on here for Noah. Remember, he lived 500 years, 600 years growing to know his neighbors, right? Having a beer at the bar with his buddies, working on motorcycles at the shop, talking yard work to his neighbors, right? Everyone he knew except for his family has just been destroyed. A year ago, there were millions of people, and now me and my family are the last people on earth. Everything is different. The sky doesn't even look the same way that it used to before. The ground looks different. Everything is different. And I didn't ask for this. Anybody ever feel that type of tension and turmoil on your soul? I didn't ask for this. Noah and his family are charged with the responsibility of repopulating the whole earth. God said, we're going to start over with you. I can't imagine Noah thought anything other than, I didn't ask for this. And he's wrestling with all of these thoughts. There's not even a word that I can think of that could describe what he must be feeling. You know, there's survivor's guilt that people have, sure, but to be the last surviving family out of everyone in the earth, I can't even comprehend what that would be like. This is outside of our human ability to cope with that type of experience, to even comprehend or understand what it means that we're the last living people on the earth. And yet Noah, after he walks through these thoughts and these feelings, and he sees this new earth before him, he makes the decision and says, I didn't ask for this, but God, I trust you. You are still God. I believe that you haven't forgotten us. You haven't forsaken us. You haven't abandoned us here. You've saved us for a good purpose. And despite the fact that I can't understand everything going on around me right now, I still believe you are God. And I worship you for being God. And it says he makes a burnt sacrifice offering to the Lord. It says God smelled the aroma of the sacrifice. But what we need to understand is it's not that he just smelt some meat cooking and thought, what's for dinner? pork the other white meat. No. I guess that wouldn't have been a sacrifice. Dove the other white meat. And God doesn't smell the aroma of the meat cooking. He smells the aroma of Noah's heart. Noah's intention to say, despite everything that I just went through, despite my own brokenness, my despair, and whatever it is that I'm feeling and walking through right now, I still trust you, God, and acknowledge you are sovereign. You are Lord. And then it says, when God smelled the aroma of the sacrifice, of Noah's heart and his attitude, God says, I will never destroy the earth with a flood the way that I did again. And it says that God put his bow in the sky, the rainbow. Now, there's a lot of layers of what that could mean, and there's a lot of illustrations that go there, but strictly trying to look at it from the original audience and how they would be understanding this, there's a few things that I think are really important for us to see happening when it says God puts his rainbow in the sky. Here, God is making a rainbow covenant. This is what we're going to call it at Dumb Christian, a rainbow covenant. And there's 3 layers that I want us to see here. The first is, and the Bible tells us this, that the rainbow acts as a reminder to God, hey, no matter how bad things get, you promised you wouldn't destroy the whole world by flooding it, so don't do it. But the Jewish tradition says that the rainbow isn't just a picture for us to tell us, hey, God remembers he won't flood the earth again, but the Midrash tells us that the rainbow is to remind us that it's our sin that caused the flood in the first place. That we still sin. The rainbow is a reminder that we still have sin in our lives, and we're no better than the people that God had to destroy in the flood to bring about his salvation. So the rainbow reminds God of his promise. It's also a reminder of us to be mindful of our sin. But then the rainbow is also set, according to Jewish tradition, as a reminder to all of creation that everything changed at the flood. Remember earlier when we said 40 is a significant indicator of change? It's an indicator of significant change. And that everything in creation was affected by this 40 days and 40 nights of rain. So much so that the weather now occurs, the environment occurs, the niche nuances of the way the world acts changed, even so much down to the physicality of water in the atmosphere, because science explains how a rainbow works. There's these tiny little water particles that are suspended in the air, and light goes through them and refracts into these beautiful colors that are arrayed against the sky. And if rainbows were never seen before this, it's an indication that everything about the atmosphere changed. Everything about creation changed during the flood, when the firmament fell to the earth. And the most significant change that occurred was that God has removed his hand of proactive, present, sovereign action within creation, and he moves himself into the background. You see, we know that Adam and Eve were exiled from the garden, but we still see that God interacts with people. It says he interacted with Cain, even after Cain killed Abel. It says Enoch walked with God. There's some sort of presence, some active, proactive presence that God has within creation up until the flood. He wipes everything out and he says, okay, the Midrash tells us that at the flood, God said, I am now going to no longer preserve the longevity of human life and divinely ordain things to go the way that they have been going. I am removing my hand of proactive sovereignty, and I'm moving myself to the background of creation. Man, the brokenness of man, sinful man, will have total dominion, and they can do with the earth whatever they want. Human lifespans drastically decrease after the flood. Very quickly, we go from people almost living to 1,000 years to be considered very old when they reach 100. People don't live as long. God's longevity, his provision, his protection has been removed, and he fades to the background, still course correcting so that he can bring about the Messiah, the one to save and redeem all of creation. But everything has changed. The rainbow covenant in general is a good thing, right? It's a reminder to God, don't destroy the world with a global flood again. To people, it's a good reminder, hey, don't forget, you're no better than the people who were killed in the flood. You still have sin in your life. And it's also a reminder that as God's interaction with creation has changed, so too does our responsibility to the world, the earth, creation, ourselves, our relationships. But even when God moves and creates good things, sometimes we are still stuck in the effects of brokenness that it has on our very souls. And Noah recognizes the rainbow covenant is a good thing. God is going to bless him and his family. But, and I'm taking some liberties here with my imagination, to have experienced the deaths of millions of people, to experience that survivor's guilt, and maybe even I should have been with them. I should have died with them. I'm no better than they are. Why am I still here? Anybody know what that feels like? Because Noah's first thing he sets his hands to, the first job he gives himself, is to plant a vineyard, make wine, and drink it. And he drinks so much he blacks out, passes out naked, trying, I imagine, to cope with what he just has walked through. He still lives for another 350 years dealing with what he just had to experience and witness. And the first thing he sets his hands to is to get blackout shit-faced. And he passes out naked in his tent. And Noah's youngest son, Ham, nicknamed Porkchop, walks in and sees his father naked. Nakedness was the first thing that Adam and Eve discovered about themselves once they embodied evil. Once they took evil upon themselves, they enacted it, they participated in evil. That's when they discovered they were naked. Nakedness is directly tied to the evil within ourselves. And Noah has just barely a shred of dignity left to his name, being one of the sole survivors to a global catastrophe. And in that moment, even the last shred of dignity that Noah had is taken away. And he kind of loses it. And he goes off on this tirade where he curses Ham and Ham's son Canaan and all of Ham's descendants. And he says, "Cursed are your descendants, and your brother Shem, his descendants, are going to be at war with your descendants." The next chapter, chapter 10, we get a list of whose descendants belong to who. We see who Ham's descendants are: Canaan, Egypt, and many of the other tribes who will live in the land of Canaan when the descendants of Shem, Abraham's kids, the Israelites, are liberated from Canaan's child Egypt, Ham's child Egypt, and they make their way into the promised land of Canaan, where all these tribes who come from Ham's descendants live. Now, either God is using Noah to prophesy about what's going to happen from between Shem's descendants and Ham's descendants. Or, and some sages actually suggest this, some Jewish rabbis, teachers suggest that because of the significant change that occurred here, where God removed his hand and has given dominion to imperfect image bearers, broken people, God is actually honoring the curse that Noah gives to his son Ham and the blessing that he gives to his son Shem. And God says, okay, I can use this. I am going to use this curse and this blessing to bring about the Israelites and to work my salvation into this thing that has been completely broken. I can work with that. Or maybe there's some other third option that I haven't even thought of. The reason why we lump this chunk of chapters together, I mean, there's a lot of details that we could probably really unpack and take a lot of time to explore. But what Moses is doing here by writing out this story is first of all, he's giving us a narrative so that we understand what happened that brought about this significant global change that brought us to the point where this is how the world functions and operates now. But it's also laying the groundwork for the Israelites to understand what they're about to walk into. They've just been liberated from Egypt, and they are about to walk into the promised land that is populated by their ancient uncle Ham and his descendants. And why it is that there's going to be conflict and tension. Because their ancestor removed the last shred of dignity of a righteous man that God spared. And they perpetuated that. It's not that they're suffering for Ham's mistakes, but that he and his descendants lived in that attitude. Anybody ever have the thought like, oh man, if we could just get rid of that people group, or the people who think this way, or if we could just wipe out all the people who treat people this way, right? If we could just get rid of all of the people who fit into some sort of category. I'm not even going to start listing off. But I'm sure we could come up with our own ideas of, man, the world would be such a better place if all the people who lived like this were gone. The flood also teaches us that's not the way we fix the human heart, the human condition. An imperfect image that whenever we choose a good for ourselves that's different than the good that God would choose for us, we just continue to perpetuate. And ultimately it brings us to the point where we need a rainbow to remind us, I am no better than those wiped out in the flood. I am no better than they are. None of us are. The only way this is going to be resolved is if God's good is victorious over our own. So we need him to save us from the brokenness that we're going to keep perpetuating. And that is Genesis, chapters 7 through 10. Again, read it for yourself. There's a lot going on there. But we're just trying to take a dumb Christian approach to understand why Moses wrote what he wrote the way that he wrote it. And what he wanted the Israelites to understand when he wrote it. I love you guys. We'll catch you later. Man, guys, thank you so much for walking through that chunk of scripture with me as we explore the flood and what it meant that Noah cursed his son and blessed his other son. Be sure to check out our YouTube page, Dumb Christian Podcast, for exclusive content that you'll find there. Dumb Christian thoughts, dancing with Jesus, and dumb Christian dad jokes. Be sure to subscribe, hit like, ring that bell, and the dogs will come running. We'll catch you guys later in the next one. I love you guys.